Hello, this is Steve with another video for my YouTube channel where I do, English Cambridge activities, stuff that I'm doing in private classes. Following on from last week, we're moving on to part 2. So what I've done is hundreds of hours of work, years of experience with the B2 and C1 exams, and I've thought about the most common question types you see on the use of English part 2, because they are testing specific grammar points that they expect you to know at B2 and C1. So I've looked through loads of old exams, all my old activities that I've done, and I've sort of categorized them into things you can study, things you can learn, things you can practice, so you can almost guarantee that when these type of questions come up on the exam, which they will, you will know how to answer them. You will have an idea. You won't be looking at that blank, that gap, thinking, what do I do? No, you've got an idea because you know the types of questions. So because it's part 2, there's no options. I've done it a little bit differently. Here's your first 4 questions. There's one grammar point being tested here, but I'm giving you 4 questions on it to give you the best value for money, the most bang for your buck, as they say. We are currently on the most difficult setting. If you can answer these 4 questions like this with no extra clues, without me telling you anything, well done, you are doing very, very well. That is what you should try and do. You should pause the video and try and answer these 4 questions with one word in the gap, a similar type of word, but a different word for all 4 questions. Okay, if you've done that, let's see how you did. We're going to go step by step. I'm going to give you first a little clue. That is, all the answers are relative pronouns. You should know that if you are studying for your B2 and C1 exam, because it's almost every part 2 exam, one of the answers is going to be a relative pronoun, as in the man that I saw or the man who I saw. Both possible because it's a defining relative pronoun. Here there's a bit of a mix. Okay, that's the first step. If any of your answers were not relative pronouns, who, when, where, that, which, why, whose, then you've got a problem. You need to change them. Change them. Now you should have 4 answers that are relative pronouns. Okay, you should have these 4 answers. I'm not telling you which one goes in which question. That's your next step that you need to figure out. If you've got these 4, they're probably going to be correct. If you don't, then you might need to change one because you need to figure out which one is correct for each gap. Now we're finally going to look at the answers. This is like pretty easy mode now. I've given you the 4 words. You can figure out by reading the sentences, by using the clues in the sentence, which word goes where. Of course, it's the student whose teacher, because it's possession. It's the teacher of the student. The student's teacher. The student whose teacher. This doesn't explain why. If you said how, that's also fine. That can be used as a relative pronoun in this sentence. What, of course, meaning the thing that. That's your test. If the thing that fits, then the answer is what. And finally, which. Has to be which, doesn't it? Because there's a comma there, which means this is a non-defining relative pronoun. I am just adding some extra information about the book being self-published. There's a comma. It's non-defining. We can only use which. We can't use that. That's an important grammar point for part 2 because relative pronouns are very common. Right, we're going to do the same for 7 more very common grammar points. Now you know how this works. Here's your next 4 questions. Pause the video, try and answer them. Read the sentence carefully because there are some important context clues in the sentence which tell you what the answer has to be. You have done it. Please don't just pretend to do it and say, oh, I knew it. Yeah, when he said the answers, I sort of had an idea. No, do it. Don't cheat yourself. Here comes the topic. These are all passive sentences, aren't they? So they're all going to be using to be, past participle, found, thought, judged, regarded, past participle. They're going to need some form of to be. So you should have passive sentences for all of them if you don't change them. You've paused the video, you're happy with your answers. You should have these 4 words somewhere in these 4 sentences. Pause the video, make sure you've got these 4 words somewhere. And here come the answers. Of course, A is has been found. We are talking about recent things, so we're going to use present perfect. That's why it has been found. B is a nice one. New evidence appeared. well then we're going to need a past tense, because they thought that in the past, it was thought. You could even say had been thought, but we've only got one word in part 2, haven't we? But the clue was new evidence appeared, so we must be talking about the past. C, it's a bit of an easy one, could be judged. The clue here is that you just need it's just a passive sentence. Judged is past participle, could, making it slightly more difficult with a modal auxiliary, but could be judged is a passive sentence. And the last one, there's another little trick here. If she was a pioneer of physics, we're talking about the past, aren't we? Because I think physics is pretty old. And if she was a pioneer, she was at the start of physics. So she was. We can't really say is, because her peers are all dead. We're talking about when physics started. So it has to be past tense. That's why was is much better. And I've deliberately made the question like that, because that's the kind of thing that they will test on the exam, that you are reading to find the correct tense, to find the correct word for part 2. Let's move on to number 3. Answer the questions, then pause the video, then resume the video, because I'm going to tell you the answers. Now, these are all quantity words, but obviously at B2-C1, you're not just going to have quantity words as in like some of the people. No, it's going to be a little bit more difficult than that. So if you don't have a quantity word, change it. What is a quantity word? You know, all, some, these kind of words, many, but some trickier ones for B2 and C1. Trickier ones like the ones I'm going to show you now. Those should be your 4 answers that go in the gap somewhere. Change it if you need to. Pause the video. Here come the answers. A is going to be each, because we're referring to them as individual ones. Each of them has its unique call. B, this is an expression that you see quite a lot on C1, after all, meaning after reflection, like of course they won. On reflection, they're the champions. Sort of with looking at something after it's happened, after all, of course it had to happen. C, another common C1 expression, every single, meaning all of them, but for emphasis. And D, I probably should have made this a better sentence. The point was, I was trying to think of something that everyone agrees on. Everyone agrees that action is needed on climate change. Maybe they don't. Maybe you could say some for this. But the point was, few people disagree. Everyone agrees. So few disagree, this kind of double negative idea, another common part 2 trick. Let's move on. We are on number 4, which is you tell me. Answer the questions and tell me what is being tested here. I'm going to tell you the answers now. We are testing reference words, words that refer back to the previous idea. This is really common in this part of the exam, like all of these categories that I'm sharing with you. So you should have 4 reference words, you know, words like I like football, it is fun. The it is referring to football, it's referring back to the previous thing that was mentioned. So what words do we need to reference the previous idea? We need these words. These words are the ones we need. And I will put them in the right place for you, which you should have already done. Now, A and B are a nice one, because this does illustrate quite nicely the difference between this and it, which some students can confuse. A, the best answer is definitely this, because we are referring to the whole idea of the sentence. The fact that the project deadline is approaching, you know, it's a whole concept, a whole idea, a whole event. This whole thing increases stress levels. Whereas B, the process is complicated, it needn't be painful. I'm just referring to the process, the one thing, you know, the subject of the previous sentence, so it's it. If we're just referring to the subject or object of the previous sentence, it would probably sound better. If we're referring to the whole idea and its consequences, then this sounds better. C is going to be those. We're talking about those people, and we can omit people or those cats or whatever. And D, this is a nice one. If we're talking about several reasons, then logically you're going to start explaining them and you're going to refer to the first. And we don't need to say the first one, the first reason. We can omit the object because we can with first, not with many other adjectives. You couldn't say The principal is job opportunities. That sounds a bit strange. The biggest, maybe, but first definitely sounds good like that. Okay, so that's reference words, something common that's tested. Let's move on to another category. Answer the questions. Pause the video, because I'm going to tell you the answers, because you've had time to pause it and try and think about them. And you should have realised that these are all negative words. So different ways of saying no, negative words. And you should have these 4 words, which all begin with N, don't they? All ways of saying no in slightly different grammatical and semantic meaning, as in the meaning is slightly different. And here are the answers. No matter. No matter, meaning it doesn't matter what it is. No matter. B, she might help or she might not. That's how we speak English. She might do it, she might not. It could be, it could not be, and so on. The negative to go with a verb is not. C is an expression, second to none. And D is another expression. To have nothing to do with something means it has no relation. And in English we say it has nothing to do with it. You could also say it had little to do with it. It still makes sense. In the exam both would be okay. All clear. Good. Part 6. The 6 of 8 common question types for use of English Part 2 at B2 and C1. Answer the questions. And here come the answers. Now, how would you describe what you are writing here? You should have realised that you are writing prepositions. So common on use of English Part 2. Probably the most common. Difficult thing is prepositions go in lots of different ways, right? There's different functions of prepositions. This one I've tried to pick out one specific common one, which is prepositions that are used with specific verbs. Although I've messed it up with be and it's not really with a verb. But anyway, you get the idea. Blame has a preposition for this sentence. Encourage, accuse, they all have specific prepositions, which I'm going to show you now so you can check. Those are your 4 prepositions that you should have used, obviously all different for part 2. And they go like this. Here comes the answer. You blame something on something or someone. Like you don't blame it on the moonlight, blame it on the boogie. You blame the defeat on the defenders, and so on. You do something by mistake. That one's not really a verb collocation, but I mean there's a verb, but it's more like by mistake is the phrase. Encourage is always with the infinitive, so encourage someone to do something. The trick there, which I've done deliberately, hopefully people appreciate this because they do it on the exam as well, by putting this adverb here, always, I make it slightly difficult because I'm splitting the infinitive, so you don't just think, oh, trust, to trust. No, the adjective, the adverb makes it slightly more difficult, and they will do that on the exam. They will separate the important clue word, which is the verb here. They will separate it further from the gap, so always forget these things or think what's really important is this word here. And finally, accuse someone of doing something. Of course, accuse someone of doing something. So those are our prepositions that go with those verbs or those phrases. Number 7, you're going to notice something similar. Answer these questions. And then they are more prepositions, really, but they are prepositions as used in phrases. So I've called them phrase collocations because, it's how you put the phrases together, common phrases. Now we're more at C1 level, I've got to be honest. Maybe question C you could find on a B2 exam, the rest are C1. But well done if you've had a go at them, The difficult ones are the ones where you learn something. If you already know all of these, why are you watching this video? You're wasting your time. Is it just because you like the sound of my voice? Well, that's great, but there's probably better things you could be doing. If you don't know them, then well done, you're watching the video, you're learning them. These are the 4 words that you can put in the gaps. They all sort of sound similar, but these are the best answers. You stare in disbelief at something. This is a nice one because you can replace stare with look, gaze, any other way of regarding something with your eyes. I don't know. And you can replace disbelief with shock, horror, surprise. but it's always going to be in. So you can gaze in horror at something, or you can look in disgust at something, but it's with in for these looking verbs with an adjective. B, you shudder at the thought of something. It's just an expression. C, the clue here is pressure, isn't it? Which I'm sure in most languages is you are under pressure, because the pressure is pushing you down and weighing down on you. And D, this is a nice one. You're brimming with confidence. Brimming has a similar meaning to overflowing. You imagine the cup is overflowing with confidence. It's brimming with confidence. You've got lots of confidence. You are brimming with confidence. So there we go. Some more prepositions. And our last one is going to be number 8. 4 more questions for you. Typical B2-C1 Part 2 question category. Answer the questions. Pause the video to do it, so you've got time to answer them, really think about them, because now I'm going to tell you what these questions are, which I hope you've sort of realised. There are some pretty big clues there with time and 60s and now, and these are all time markers. Expressions, words, prepositions that are used to mark how time is passing in the sentence. So you should have all time words. Specifically, you should have these time words, which I'm going to show you now. Once, since, by, and until. Fill them in if you didn't already have them. Well done if you did. And we should have since the 1960s, of course, because that's considered as a point in time where we're looking back at this time. We're considering it as a point. Again, the trick is saying at least. I'm putting a little adverb in there to make it a bit more difficult. B is by the time. This will have happened by this time. They're like marking when it will have happened. C, context of the sentence. I didn't realise until you turned around. And D, once is a nice answer. There are more possibilities as well, but once is probably the most elegant answer. What once was this is now this. What previously was. Okay. So there we go. There's 8 very common question types for part 2. Hope that was useful. I really do hope it's useful. I spent some time putting this together for my classes, really trying to identify and understand part 2. And of course, if you want to practice more, do loads of part 2 activities. What I've given my students to do as homework after giving them this class is to add one phrase to each category. So can you think of another word that's used as a time marker in English, different from these, and add another sentence? And the same for another collocation, like stare in disbelief, wilt under the pressure, brim with confidence. Think of another expression with a different preposition with on and add that. And that way you're learning more of these typical categories that are often on part 2. But anyway, we'll leave it there. Thank you. Have a nice week. Come back next week for Use of English part 3, common questions again. Goodbye.